I was loved for what I did, not for who I was. It took me a long time to understand the difference, and even longer to admit how much of my life had been built around it. At first, it did not feel painful. It felt meaningful. It felt flattering. It felt safe. People appreciated me, needed me, relied on me. I was the one who remembered, the one who helped, the one who made things easier, the one who noticed what others missed, the one who stayed calm, the one who gave more, the one who held everything together without making a scene. And because people responded warmly to that version of me, I began to believe I was deeply loved. But what I know now is that being appreciated for your usefulness is not the same as being known for your humanity. Being needed is not the same as being cherished. Being valued for what you do is not the same as being loved for who you are when you have nothing left to offer but yourself. That is a devastating truth when it finally reaches you, because once you see it, you begin looking back over years of your life and noticing how many relationships were built around your giving, your soothing, your labor, your emotional availability, your reliability, your ability to carry what others did not want to carry. You notice how often your worth was reinforced when you were helping, fixing, supporting, understanding, adjusting, softening, serving. You notice how often love seemed to arrive most strongly when you were useful. And if you are not careful, a woman can build her whole identity around that pattern. She begins to believe that her safest way to be loved is to remain indispensable. That is what happened to me. I became indispensable. I became the woman people could count on, the woman who handled things without asking for much, the woman who stayed strong, the woman who remembered details, absorbed tension, made life easier, listened longer, gave more, tolerated more, excused more, and expected less in return. I was proud of that for a while. Proud that I could carry so much. Proud that I was dependable. Proud that people trusted me with their needs, their pain, their disorganization, their emotional storms. But what I did not understand was that the more consistently useful I became, the less often people had to meet me outside that usefulness. And if no one has to meet you outside what you provide, it becomes possible to live a whole life while being deeply relied on and quietly unseen. That kind of invisibility is hard to describe because it does not always look lonely from the outside. You can be surrounded by people, texted often, needed constantly, appreciated regularly, thanked sincerely. You can have family, friends, a partner, children, responsibilities, routines, conversations, and still feel some private ache that says, they know what I do for them, but do they know me? Not the capable version, not the useful version, not the woman who keeps everything running. Me, the woman who gets tired, confused, uncertain, disappointed, messy, emotionally needy, quiet, angry, soft, unsure. The woman who sometimes has nothing practical to give. The woman who wants to be held without first proving she deserves it. That was the part of me that remained mostly hidden. Not because no one allowed it, because I did not know how to trust that it would be welcomed. I had become too skilled at earning love through usefulness. Usefulness felt safer than vulnerability. If I was helping, I knew where I stood. If I was supporting, I knew I mattered. If I was the one people leaned on, I did not have to find out whether I would still feel important if I simply arrived with my own need instead. That fear shaped me more than I understood. I thought I was being loving. Sometimes I was. But sometimes I was also building a whole emotional economy around service, because service felt more dependable than mutual tenderness. I think a lot of women know this economy. They know what it means to be praised for being giving, understanding, mature, patient, selfless, nurturing, emotionally strong. Those words sound beautiful, and sometimes they are, but they can also become a trap if the woman receiving them is slowly disappearing behind the role they describe. Because the world is very comfortable with women who give. It is very comfortable with women who carry, very comfortable with women who adapt, very comfortable with women who make life softer, easier, more functional for everyone around them. What the world is often less comfortable with is a woman who stops performing usefulness long enough to say, "I want to be loved," without constantly earning it. That sentence would have terrified the younger version of me. It would have sounded selfish, demanding, ungrateful, because I had quietly absorbed the belief that my goodness was tied to my generosity. My lovability was tied to my helpfulness. My value was tied to my emotional labor. So when I felt exhausted, I did not stop. I gave differently, more carefully maybe, more resentfully at times, though I hated admitting it. But I kept giving. Because underneath all that giving was a question I did not want to face honestly. If I stop doing so much, will people still love me the same way? That is one of the saddest questions a woman can build a life around. Not because it means she is weak, because it means she has learned, somewhere along the way, that the truest test of love feels too risky to run. The truest test is not whether people appreciate what she does. It is whether they know how to sit with who she is when she is not solving, soothing, organizing, remembering, carrying, and anticipating. When she is just there with her own need, her own truth, her own humanity. If that kind of presence feels unsafe, then usefulness becomes a mask you are terrified to remove. I wore that mask for years, not because I was fake, because I was afraid. Afraid to be too much, afraid to be disappointed, afraid to find out that the role I played so beautifully had become the main doorway through which people experienced me, afraid that if I were less useful, I might also become less loved. So, I stayed attentive, helpful, capable, warm, thoughtful. And in doing so, I gave people many good reasons to appreciate me, but not always enough opportunity to know the quieter, needier, truer parts of me. That creates a specific kind of loneliness. A woman can be deeply involved in other people's lives and still feel alone because the version of her they mostly interact with is the one she has prepared for them, the one built for contribution, the one built for competence, the one that makes life more manageable. That version may be real, but it is not the whole self. And when the whole self has nowhere natural to land, loneliness becomes a private room you visit often and explain to no one. I visited that room more than anyone knew, sometimes late at night, when everyone else had what they needed from me for the day. Sometimes in the kitchen after cleaning up. Sometimes in the car. Sometimes after a conversation where I had listened carefully, offered comfort, solved something, made someone else feel safe, and then felt strangely hollow afterward. Not because I resented helping, because I was beginning to notice how often my worth was activated through giving while my deeper self remained untouched. I would think, if I stopped offering so much, what would be left between me and these people? That thought felt dangerous. So, I often pushed it down. But pushed down truths do not disappear. They gather weight. And over time, the weight of this one became hard to ignore. I started noticing how uncomfortable I felt when I needed something and could not package it neatly. I started noticing how guilty I felt when I wanted rest that served no one but me. I noticed how quickly I explained my boundaries, softened my requests, apologized for my own limits. I noticed that I was far more practiced in asking, "What do you need?" than in answering that question for myself. That is not balance. That is self-loss in polite clothing. I think about all the ways this shaped my relationships. In love, I often defaulted to being supportive, understanding, emotionally intelligent. perceptive. Those are good things. But when they become your entire position in the relationship, you stop being met as an equal soul and start being experienced as emotional infrastructure. You become the one who keeps the connection warm, readable, organized, held together. And if the other person is not growing in the opposite direction, toward your inner world, your needs, your complexity, then the relationship may feel loving while still becoming profoundly unequal. That was painful to realize. Because there is no easy villain in a story like this. The people around me were not always cruel. Many were loving in the ways they knew how. But love that is built mostly around what you offer can remain shallow, even when sincere. It can remain dependent on your role. And if you never challenge that pattern, it becomes normal. So normal that you stop even expecting to be known beyond what you do. I also had to face my own participation in it. That was one of the hardest parts. I wanted to say, no one saw me, but the fuller truth was that I had made myself easiest to love through usefulness. I had trained people to expect strength, steadiness, care, competence, and very little raw need. I had hidden parts of myself so well that some people never learned they were missing anything. That is not self-blame. It is self-honesty. The pattern was not only done to me. I helped build it every time I chose performance over truth, every time I gave instead of revealed, every time I hinted instead of asked, every time I offered labor where I actually needed tenderness. There came a point when I could no longer ignore how tired that made me. Not physically tired only. Soul tired. Tired of being valuable in ways that left me emotionally hungry. Tired of being admired for strength that no one realized was costing me too much. Tired of being the one who understood everyone else while feeling increasingly difficult to understand even to myself. Tired of being the answer instead of being a person. That kind of tiredness changes something. It makes you less willing to keep smiling through the same arrangement. Less willing to keep pretending usefulness is enough. Less willing to keep accepting appreciation as a substitute for intimacy. I remember asking myself one day, very quietly, if I stopped doing so much, who would still know how to love me? That question frightened me because it touched something fundamental. Not only what other people had learned, but what I had learned. I had learned to make myself useful before making myself visible. I had learned to earn closeness through labor. I had learned to feel safer as a source than as a self. And until I unlearned that, no relationship was going to fully heal what hurt. That is where real change began for me. Not when other people magically started seeing me better, but when I stopped believing that my deepest value lay in what I could provide. When I stopped treating my own needs like administrative inconveniences. When I stopped assuming that love must always be justified by service. When I started letting myself be a whole person in the room, not only the helpful one. That shift was not easy. It felt awkward, exposing, even rude at times, because women who have been loved for usefulness often feel guilty the moment they start showing up with more unscripted humanity. But unscripted humanity is exactly what real love must be able to hold. If I could speak to my younger self, I would tell her this. Do not become so good at being needed that no one learns how to know you. Do not confuse gratitude with intimacy. Do not mistake dependence for devotion. Do not build your whole identity around being the woman who makes everything easier for everyone else. You deserve to be loved when you are not giving. You deserve to be chosen when you are tired. You deserve to be known beyond your labor. You deserve to exist in a relationship as a person, not only as a comfort system. I would tell her that usefulness is a beautiful trait, but a terrible foundation for self-worth. I would tell her that if she keeps offering her best only through effort, she will one day feel privately starved in the middle of a life where many people say they love her. I would tell her to let people meet her before she has solved herself into something easier to receive. I would tell her to speak her need before resentment hardens it. I would tell her to stop apologizing for being human. I was loved for what I did, not for who I was. That sentence hurts because it names a life I helped create and then had to painfully outgrow. But maybe it can still become useful in the right way if someone hearing it recognizes the pattern sooner than I did. So, if this story feels familiar to you, ask yourself something honest. If I stopped giving so much, would the people around me still know how to reach me, value me, and love me well? And just as importantly, would I know how to let them? Because that is where the real healing begins. Not when you become less caring, when you become more real.